On today's Daily Tea, I am joined by Eric Trump, the son of President Donald J. Trump and the man currently running the Trump Organization. He tells me about his childhood, about the plot that he says is being waged against his father, and does Eric himself have any presidential ambitions?
I understand the game very well at this point, and I think we've developed great voices. I really do. I mean, hence this book right now is the number one book in the country by far. Not even close. Not even close, right? No, the reason I say that is people adore us in this country, and people love it, right? And the MAGA movement is the greatest movement that we've ever seen in the history of the United States politics, right? And I've been a big part of that movement. I think if I wanted to, I could.
Eric, let me begin by saying this is an important book. It's an important book because we all think we know Donald Trump, and we all think we know the Trump family. But we don't really. We see them through the lens and the prism of the media and of politics. And what you've done is given us a perspective on that family that we wouldn't otherwise get. And I think it's I honestly think it's one of the most honest perspectives that I've seen in a book of this nature. And I want to begin with an event that we all know very well, but your take on it will be unique. And that, if I can take you back to July the 13th, 2024, Donald Trump was speaking at a rally in Pennsylvania. You were watching it at home with your wife, Lara, and with your two children, Luke and Carolina. And of course, the president was shot. What was that moment like? How did you react?
It was horrible. I mean, I very well, could have been at that rally. I wasn't. That was 2 days before the RNC. I was the delegate from the state of Florida that was going to, vote to make my father effectively the Republican nominee for president of the United States. And so figured go back, grab some clothes, decompress for a day before what was otherwise going to be a crazy week. And yeah, I was sitting there. I had two kids on my lap. I was working on an email and I heard the shots. And I talked about it a lot in the book. I've done a lot of competitive shooting. It's been a big part of my life. And I instantly knew what that sound was. And I jumped up. I think my face was probably 2 inches away from the TV screen. I'm trying to see if I could see, chest wounds of any sort. Obviously, he's wearing a dark suit. So if there was blood, you probably wouldn't see it under a dark blue suit. And obviously we saw blood on his face and, on his hands and, coming down the side of his face. And, I knew every single person on that stage, every one of those Secret Service agents. They're all friends of mine. Many of them were on my detail. The female was on my detail for a 3-year period of time. The other two guys in the back I know extremely well. And Sean, who ran my father's detail, I knew extremely well. And, and they're sitting on top of a person I love more than anybody. And there's nothing you can do. You're powerless, right? And I don't think type A people like to be powerless. That wasn't, I would have done anything I could have to be there at that moment. And it was horrible. I'll never forget it. I mean, they made up the Russia hoax, which was just made up lies, right? You have secret servers in the basement of your Trump Tower communicating with the Kremlin. And then they impeached my father the first time. The second time, they went after every Supreme Court justice. They took us off of Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. They did everything they could to silence our voice in this country. They put gag order after gag order. I became the most subpoenaed person in American history for doing nothing wrong. For doing nothing wrong other than the fact that I was the person who ran the Trump Organization, which was a namesake to everything my father had ever built. They removed us from the ballots of Colorado. They removed us from the ballots in Maine. They raided our home. They raided Mar-a-Lago. They raided Melania's room. They raided Barron's room. They weaponized every district attorney and every attorney general in the country to come after us. Right. And that's just a few of the things. I mean, they leaked all of our tax returns, my tax returns, my father's tax returns, all of our corporate employees' tax returns. The IRS leaked all of those to the New York Times. They did everything they could to cancel us and bankrupt us. And that was the siege that I had just started writing about when I named this book Under Siege. And then I see my father, bleeding from the face on the ground, covered with Secret Service agents. I'll never quite forget it. But they wanted him off that stage. They wanted me off of that stage. They wanted the conservative movement in America. They wanted us dead. And then you saw that they tried to kill him, obviously, 8 weeks later. Then you saw what they did to Charlie Kirk, who was a dear friend of mine. This was the siege. This is Under Siege. And the book has never been more fitting than it is right this second. They did everything they could. I mean, I know most of the major, banking CEOs in this country. And you literally had government officials calling them up and saying, debank the Trump Organization. If you bank them, we regulate you. We're not going to take it kindly. They did everything they could. And then obviously, you know this better than anybody because you've reported on it extremely well. But, the government was working with Twitter to censor us, right? The government was working with Twitter to claim that, Hunter's laptop was Russian disinformation. The government was getting intel officers from the CIA to write the fact that Hunter's laptop was all Russian disinformation. It was all a coordinated siege against our family, right?
Mhm.
They wanted him off that stage. They wanted him imprisoned. They wanted him voiceless. That's the whole point of the deplatforming and the gag orders. I think the thing that's frustrating to me, right? I'm not gonna say that Joe Biden ordered a hit on my father, right? That's not at all what I'm trying to convey here. But clearly, their party, I mean, they had espoused violence over and over and over. I mean, you had Democratic senators who literally called for my father to no longer have Secret Service protection, right? I mean, if you didn't want to see somebody hurt, why would you say that the most famous person on earth should lose their Secret Service protection, as certain Democratic senators were trying to do? So yeah, there's no question that many of them wanted violence on my father, right? I mean, you even watch some of the races that are going on right now. We have a race right now in the U.S. in Virginia where you have an attorney general who literally is saying, I want to shoot that person over and over and over. I mean, it's crazy talk, right? It's
Right.
absolutely crazy talk.
So the Biden administration might not have put a hit on your father, but it encouraged people to view him violently and then exposed him to danger.
Oh, well, they've done that every day. I mean, since my father came down the escalator, they've called him a fascist. He's far from fascist. He's like the least, they've called him anti-Semitic. Isn't that ironic? Like, he's got a Jewish daughter and he's been the greatest thing that's ever happened to Israel. They've called him sexist. I mean, isn't that ironic? His first campaign manager was a woman, the first time in American history. We won in 2016. His second campaign manager in 2024, guess who it was? Susie Wiles, also a woman. I mean, kind of dispelled it. They called him racist, and yet you had the biggest African-American turnout in the history of the country for a Republican because, they didn't like the mugshot. They didn't like a lot of things, but they certainly didn't like the mugshot, in all the ways that he was getting attacked him. And so, but I think the frustration that I have with Butler is as follows. First of all, as a competitive shooter, to allow somebody on a rooftop at 130 yards with a modern scoped rifle is unfreaking acceptable, right? Let's just start there. It's unacceptable. My 8-year-old son will make that shot 100 out of 100 times. That's like Colin Montgomery missing a 4-inch putt. Like, he'll never, ever, ever do it. Tiger Woods missing a 6-inch putt. He'll never miss that shot. So that's the first unacceptable thing. Second of all, there's a lot of people in this country that are really frustrated. We don't know anything about this guy. We have one picture of the person. The kid looked like he was a prepubescent 14-year-old. And this is the person that tried to literally change, the face of democracy in the largest superpower anywhere in the world, tried to exterminate a president, it blow off his head, and we know nothing about this kid. They were able to break into the phones of every single January 6th protester, grandmothers who were walking through a Capitol taking selfies, causing no harm, causing no damage. But yet, they couldn't get into the phones of a guy who literally tried to assassinate a president. I am wholly unsatisfied with where we are and the answers to who this person was and who he was talking to and how he got on that roof and how he was able to get a shot off and how all of this happened and how I almost lost my father in the process. I'm wholly unsatisfied with that response.
Okay, well, let's talk more about your father as you know him so that people can understand him better. You were born in 1984 in New York City. You had a brother, Don Jr., a sister, Ivanka. Were you the tallest before Barron came along?
Yeah, I was definitely the tallest. And now I know this word isn't exactly politically correct, Tim, but now I'm like the family midget because, Barron's Barron's about 6'9". I'm 6'5", right? I'm a seriously tall guy, right? I mean, I very, very, very rarely look eye to eye with somebody. Normally I'm looking down. With Barron, I think he caught me when he was 15. He's tall. He might
have great genes.
He might even be too tall, but he's a very.
To quote the president, you have great genes. You say this in the book of your father. He's tough, no bullshit, and beautifully ambitious. He also has a heart of gold and is the greatest father a son or daughter could ever have. So what was he like as a father?
The greatest. I mean, just truly the greatest. And it was such a unique childhood. I talk about it a lot in the book, but listen, it wasn't wiffle ball in the backyard every night. I was flying to Atlantic City on helicopters every weekend with Michael Jackson and with Don King and with Mike Tyson and the biggest celebrities, the Lenny Kravitzes of the world and the Barbara Walters of the world and everybody you could possibly imagine. I mean, I grew up following him around casinos but yet as spoiled as we were in that sense, living the top of Trump Tower and having Mar-a-Lago as our second home. He expected us to work. There was no nonsense. There was no fluff. Like he put us on construction sites at the age of 11. We were making minimum wage. I was running conduit, I was pouring concrete, I was doing stone work, I was doing plumbing work, I was doing HVAC work. I was cutting down, trees, chainsaws, running big equipment. From a very early age, likely maybe too early. Meaning, kind of thinking back, it was almost borderline. Today in our soft society, Tim, they would probably call it borderline, like negligence and abuse. Right? It was the best thing that ever happened to us, and it did a couple of things. It taught us the value of a dollar. It taught us really the kind of the foundation of what my industry is, which is hard assets. And so many of our hard assets with Turnberry, just north of you with, I built every inch of Turnberry. I built every inch of Trump Aberdeen. But the last thing it did is it made you tired, right? And I'm convinced that the worst thing that you can give to type A children is time and money. Don't give them time, because they'll figure out something, a way to cause trouble, because they're kids and they're stupid, and and they've got a lot of testosterone, and they probably are overly ambitious, and if you give them money, that just compounds that problem. And I can tell you, among my peer group of friends, I don't have many that haven't been through rehab, that haven't fallen into drugs and serious drinking and a lot of other bad habits, and none of his 5 kids ever went down that path. They're wonderfully
I want to pick
accomplished.
up on that. You say in the book, another great quote, "For as long as I can remember, every morning started the same way. Before heading out to school, I would make my way to my father's bedroom and kiss him goodbye. As I was leaving, he would always end by saying, 'No drinking, no smoking, no drugs, and remember, never trust anyone.'"
Hey, based on the life that we lived, it's probably a great advice. And I remember I was 6 years old. I'm sitting there like, what's drinking, right? You don't fully understand it. What's smoking? You don't fully understand it. What are drugs? You don't really fully understand that concept at that age.
But the not trusting as well. What did he mean by don't trust people?
So that was a kind of an interesting time in his life, right? I mean, that was, if you ever read the book, The Art of the Comeback, that was really, the comeback days where he was billions of dollars into debt. He had every banker that was breathing down his throat. They were trying to take the company away from him, right? I mean, this was kind of the very early 90s, late 80s, very early 90s in New York City, where interest rates went to, 20+%. Every developer failed. I mean, every developer went bankrupt and went bust. And he fought and he fought and he fought. And, there were many times where people had, tried to take everything he had ever earned, everything he had ever built. He was in the fight of his life. And I think naturally there was probably a lot of cynicism. And, it's probably the greatest lesson that we've had, right? Be careful. Be careful. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, going into politics, I can't tell you how many great friends that were on that stage before. And as soon as we landed on this, before we stepped on the political stage, right, they were our best friends. The second we touched that stage, they were nowhere to be found. I mean, NBC is a great example of it, right? We saved NBC. My father saved NBC with The Apprentice, right? They were begging him for another contract. They loved him. He was friends with everybody. I was friends with everybody. I was on 7 seasons of it. The second he touches that escalator, goes down to the bottom, it's like NBC never even met my father before. They turned like that. And I can't tell you how many people in our lives were the same. And so, the being a little bit reluctant to have full trust in people, especially before you go through those terrible moments of your life where just you become divisive just because you get into politics. It's rather remarkable.
Well, one of those people, you say in the book that even people who shared our last name have betrayed us. Yeah. And that's a reference, of course, to Mary Trump, the president's niece.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, listen, Mary Trump wrote a 300-something page book. Very long book. You can pull up the title on it. I mean, if I've met Mary Trump 4 times in my entire adult life, I'd be shocked, right? Like, I don't know her, right? Kind of distant family member. I only remember, sitting here right now, I only remember one time I've actually seen her in my adult life. Yet she writes a profile about, our character and our personalities. I mean, I know the FedEx guy that, delivers packages to my house substantially better than I know Mary Trump. I mean, I wouldn't have a cell phone number, and yet I get to read a dissertation about who I am and who my father is. And, it's a joke. And, I think it's one of the reasons I wrote this book. And it's one of the reasons I was just so damn honest. And by the way, Tim, it really means the world that you read it. I think, I didn't hold back, and, I think, I didn't mince words. And I didn't sugarcoat anything. I didn't sugarcoat it. And I got sick and tired of seeing people who didn't know us, who weren't involved in things, who weren't involved in the campaign, all of a sudden write these long books, seeded, by the way, by, some of the big publishers who would give people, lots of money to write anything that was negative about my father. And I had to correct the record, and I had to do so from a son. I had to do so as a person who was on that stage every single day. I had to do so as a person who was raised by him. And I think, the people of the world and the American people in time can judge, those books against mine,
Yeah.
and their
One thing you point out that your father has never had a parking ticket in his life, and that he's also never had a drink in his life, I believe. And of course, tragically, his brother died of an alcohol-related problem. And you yourself suggest in the book, this is what I'm saying about this being, I think, sometimes a surprisingly frank book. You say that maybe that history, you imply that maybe that history of alcoholism in the family is one reason why the family's a little more careful than others about their private behavior.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, there's no question about it. And I lost, I told a story in the book that I've never told before, and that was about my mother. My mother was an amazing woman. In fact, she knew you guys so well, your outlets so well. My mother had a place in London. I spent a tremendous amount of time there when I was, a kid. And
we should say this is Ivana Trump, businesswoman, skier, talented designer, and your mother. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, and my mother, and listen, she was on the front page of the Vogues and the Esquires and every publication over there, including yours, hundreds and hundreds of times. There was no better fashion icon in the world than my mother. There was no better businesswoman. There was no better athlete. I mean, she did it all. I mean, she did it. She was Claudia Schiffer, Lindsey Vonn, and I mean, all combined into one, right? I mean, she was a really amazing woman, but she fell way too early to alcoholism. I saw it. I saw the downward progression later on in her life, and I found her dead body, in her house in a puddle of blood, right? And I go into pretty great detail in the book about that whole experience. It's a story I've never told really outside of this book. But there's no.
You took it upon yourself to clean up, which I think is remarkable.
I think that's a responsibility of a son at the end of the day, right? You don't. There are certain things that are really unpleasant in the world. I've dealt with a lot of them, certainly through the political fight, and clearly in experiences like that. But, I think that's the responsibility of an adult male son. And I certainly thought that was my responsibility. And, I've played out clean up on a lot of aspects of life. And, I think that comes through again in the book. But, back to kind of alcoholism, we saw it on both sides of our family. We certainly saw it on my mom's side. And we saw it on my father's side. And I think that's one of the reasons, I mean, my father was really, really influenced by the death of his brother, who was, he always talks about him being the best looking, guy he's ever met. And he loved his brother, and he just fell to something that plagues so many people. I mean, so many people, we all have friends that are plagued by it, right? In the world. And I was very honest, and it is ironic looking back about those, me going into his room when I was, young, no drinking, no drugs, no smoking. It was
also a kiss before you went to school. I mean, you say in the book that if you ever called as a child, he would pick up the phone. If he was having a business meeting, he didn't mind you playing on the floor while he was talking to people. He was affectionate.
Every time. I mean, I would call up. It didn't matter if now King Charles, but obviously we knew him. We've known him for many years, and we knew so many. It didn't matter if he was on the phone. It didn't matter if Rudy Giuliani was on the phone. I can't tell you how many times I'd call in from school. Hi Dad, how are you? Say hello to Mr. Say hello to Mayor Giuliani. He's in, hello Mayor Giuliani. I'm a big fan of yours. It's so nice to speak to you. And no, it didn't matter where we were. I mean, I called my father the second he got off the last debate stage, and I mean he had just walked behind the curtain, and he picked up the phone instantaneously. I called him the second he hit the the hospital at Butler. And actually, he called me from Butler, but within 2 minutes of him getting to the the hospital room, and didn't matter where he was always available to his kids. This was not like I'll see you tonight at at 9 o'clock when I get home from the office, and don't bother me until then. So it was a different type of childhood. It wasn't t-ball in the backyard. The guy was running a massive empire and working like crazy and working 7 days a week. But he was there for his kids in ways that people could never comprehend.
Your mother is my favorite character in the book. I would love to have met her from the way you describe her, and I want to give one story that you tell. Quote, "My high school graduation happened to be on the same week as the Monte Carlo Grand Prix, which is a very big deal to Europeans. When I told her the date of the ceremony, she replied, 'Eric, no frickin' way. Sorry, every moron graduates high school. I'm not missing Monte Carlo.'"
I was worried about putting that story in the book, but it became.
I'm so pleased you did. It's
Honestly,
brilliant.
it became one of the favorite stories in the book. And by the way, she didn't use the word fricking, just so you know. She used the word that was slightly worse than that. And no effing way am I missing the Monte Carlo Grand Prix. Every effing moron graduates high school. And by the way, I could have graduated MIT with a doctorate degree in in neurosciences. And by the way, I would have gotten the same thing. Every freaking moron graduates from MIT with a PhD. But that was her. She was just honest, right? She was one of these women. And by the way, it made me actually love her more, as crazy as that is, right? You have parents that come do that kind of stuff out of meanness. That was just so true to my mom and who she was. I mean, she could give you the greatest hug and absolutely love and adore you. And she could also tell you, too effing bad, get over it. And I heard those words all the time. I mean, and this was old school Czech discipline, right? She was from Czechoslovakia originally. She was, pretty much almost an Olympic skier. If we didn't have manners, you had two fake nails in your throat, and you felt the hand go back and forth across your face. And now that's not acceptable in either your society or ours.
You do say that she frequently spanked you.
Oh,
that's
she spanked the hell out of us. And honestly, as un-PC as it is today, I can tell you, it absolutely worked. It absolutely, she only needed to look at us, right? There was a certain point she only had to look at us where it's like, okay, she's serious and it's coming. We're about to get it, and we were always great kids. We never.
Did your father ever have to discipline you that way, or was it just your mum?
No, I listen. I think it was a really bad day if we had to get past our mother to him, right? I mean, he was, if we had to get through that war and then we got to him, it was going to be real hell to pay. So, but he was strict in a different way. I mean, he had very, very, very high expectations for us, in terms of manners, in terms of grades, in terms of achievement, in terms of never sitting still, not being lazy, fighting for the things that you believe in, and there were no Ferraris in our family at 16 years old, right? Like, there were construction sites and sledgehammers.
Well, look, come 2011, 2012, the family is hugely successful, as you say. He is a TV star thanks to The Apprentice, as are you at that point. You, your brother and your sister are also stars on that show. One of the great mysteries of life is why Donald Trump ever ran for the presidency when he knew he would have to jeopardize all of this. And I sense that you help us with that question by talking about the 2011 White House press correspondents' dinner. This is when Barack Obama famously joked about Donald Trump, and the future president did not look happy during that. Is that a turning point?
Yeah, I think psychologically it was, whether it was realized at the time. I mean, I remember I was sitting there, and Barack Obama was a community organizer in this country that went from community organizer to owning the largest house on Martha's Vineyard, right? My father has achieved 1,000 times more than Barack Obama could have ever imagined achieving, right? I mean, my father built entire skylines of the biggest cities, in the world. He's arguably the greatest, one of the greatest real estate, people in history. What he was able to build and what he was able to develop, not just in hotels, not just in residential, but in commercial and in golf. That runs in our blood. There's no one better at construction. And then you go over and you take that to a show that ran for 14 seasons. I mean, Apprentice was probably the most successful reality TV show ever, right? Everything he ever touched turned to gold, and he was remarkable. And so, he sees this guy, who was doing everything wrong in this country, getting everything wrong, making every incorrect decision for this nation, sitting there, poking fun at The Apprentice. There's no question that in a certain way that was a catalyst that said, oh, I'll show you people. And by the way, he did. I mean, he self-funded his whole campaign. He won. We won against Hillary Clinton, right, at a 5-1 financial deficit. I mean, she raised $1.5 billion. We self-funded our campaign. We didn't know what the hell we were doing in politics, and we went out and we spoke from the heart. And it was one of the resounding victories ever. And I did.
One thing you bring out, which again is a very interesting perspective, is how on the campaign trail or in his business life, Donald Trump would always go directly to people. He wouldn't speak through managers. Yeah. So if he was campaigning, he'd speak to the crowds. He wouldn't try and win the endorsement of the local person. I think that's that's what really marks him out as different in so many ways from Washington insiders.
No, he would try and win the endorsement of the local person. What he wouldn't do is he wouldn't go to a campaign manager who's responsible for a state. Hey, how are we doing? I mean, he might ask that question, but you know what he would do?
Right.
he'd go to the campaign staffer who was out there putting signs, on every single, freeway, and knocking on every door. Hey, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? He'd do the same in the business world. I'll never forget it. He would never go to the guy who owned the electrical company. He would go to the guy who was installing the electrical outlet in the wall. Hey, how are we doing? Are we on time? Are we on schedule? No, sir, we're not on schedule. We're weeks behind. We haven't been getting materials. They haven't been giving us the labor that we need. Now, obviously, the guy who owns the company, yes, sir, of course, sir, we're on time. We've got a great team out there. We're servicing you very well every day. He never wanted to listen to that voice. He wanted to listen to the voice of the actual doers. And that's what's made my father amazing. I mean, in this country, when we had the border problem, because, we were doing, guess what? You go talk to the rank and file, border agents. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Not the person who spent their last 25 years in politics ascending the ladder within that agency. He doesn't want to hear from those people. He didn't want to. He wanted to hear from the people who actually do the job, actually put their hands on people, actually have to get dirty every single day. And he was doing the same thing in the military, right? The military commanders would tell every president in this country everything that they wanted to hear. And then he'd grab one of the special forces. What are we doing wrong, sir? They're putting handcuffs on us every day. They're holding us back. They won't let us do the job. Those were the guys he loved, and those were the people he always entrusted to actually do the job. He would always grab those guys and be like, "You're in charge." You like the guy doing the dirty work. You're the guy in charge. Like, you go win the war. You go build the project. You go seal the border. He was always excellent with that.
Yeah, you mentioned in the book that when he first entered the White House, generals would call him in the middle of the night and say, "Am I allowed to do X?" And after a while, he began to say to them, "It's your job. Go away and do X. I trust you." That delegation is very interesting. Again, it's not what one might expect. It's not about being power hungry and just putting everything in the White House and doing everything out of the Oval Office. It's also about trusting people to go and do their jobs.
Well, he told me that story. I mean, it was like one of the first weeks when he was in 2017. And it's like every night I'm getting a call, hey, sir, we found this person. Do we have permission to, go do X, Y, and Z? And, first night I was like, sure. The second time I was like, hey, where did you go to school? Sir, I went to West Point. I went to the Naval Academy. Pretty smart guy, right? Like, if you call and make a recommendation to me, like, I'm not going to turn you down. Like, go take care of business and I have your back, right? The difference is the presidents in the past never had the military's back. Somebody would make a decision and then all of a sudden it'd be second guessed from Washington, D.C. He did the exact opposite. Well, listen, I have faith in you. Get the job done. You get the job done. You're remarkably smart. You don't need to be calling me from the other side of the world at 3:00 in the morning and wasting valuable time when by the time you get in touch, get the phone signals, the secured lines and everything all the way back to Washington, D.C., you could have already had the guy, right? And that's what plagued so many presidents. It wasn't just Obama. There's so many presidents that plagued over the years. I mean, even during the Vietnam War, the White House was trying to coordinate an entire war effort at the massive chagrin of all the people who were orchestrating that. And my father took the handcuffs off, and it's amazing. I can't tell you how many times I've been approached by people, Eric, I'd love to introduce myself. I served in the U.S. Army. I was special operations. I was special forces. I was SEAL. The second your father came into office, the culture shifted immediately. Immediately, the handcuffs came off, and we were allowed to go out and do what we did best, and we did it well. And, hence the reason, when my father got, in the last 18 months of my father's presidency, you didn't have a single fatality in Afghanistan, right? And then guess what? Joe Biden comes along, and the place goes to hell, and you have the botched withdrawal and everything else. My father's been an incredible leader in that regard.
He's also done some things which some Americans find very controversial. And I have to say that reading the book, you might come away with the impression that he was just a very, very good president, that there wasn't some things he did which there might be legitimate anger about. For example, he appointed the justices that led to Roe v. Wade being removed, right? Some of the pushback that you got, some of the siege that you found yourself under, is there a part of you that thinks, okay, that's because Dad was doing some controversial things?
Well, listen, I don't dive into kind of social issues because it's, they're complicated as hell. They're complicated as hell, and they're different for a lot of people, right? And I think a huge segment of the American population was massively in favor of that, right? Let's just be honest. That is an issue over here of that. There are issues on this side of the pond that aren't nearly as pertinent on your side of the pond. Let me give you one example: free speech. right? What's happening right now in the UK, and this is a person. I mean, I've been to the UK 300 times. I mean, I've built massive projects there. I know the country as well as anyone. What's happening to you guys in the UK on freedom of speech, where you voice your opinion, and all of a sudden some judge throws you in jail, is like insane, right? And yet on this side of the pond, like, freedom of speech is an absolute right. The reason it's our First Amendment right in America is because we believed it was the most important. You had freedom of speech, and then you have obviously the Second Amendment. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, obviously is First Amendment, and then you had Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms. But like, in this country, you might say it was controversial, or it didn't go over well, or that was hugely popular among so much of the country, especially when you had Democrats on the other side of the aisle who were advocating for late-term abortion, i.e., a child is about to come out in the 9-month, and you just go in and kill the baby, or the abortion of a child after birth, after consulting with your doctors, as were literally being advocated by many Democrats, right? Which is insane, which is absolutely insane. And so, I wouldn't.
I take that point. My point is that some of the siege that you faced, and I understand why it was very personal and distressing, but can you accept that some of it was just people legitimately disagreeing with your father's policies and using every lever available, as people generally do in politics, in order to push back?
No. Hold on one second. I mean, there are politics, and there is peaceful discourse, right? Over the fact that two people might disagree on abortion. People might disagree on gun rights. People might disagree on the limitations of freedom of speech, right? People can have these disagreements on either side, and they can do so, and they can debate certain things, and whoever wins that debate, and the populace ultimately wins. That's different than raiding somebody's house. That's different than subpoenaing their children with the intent to literally try and bankrupt a company. That's different than calling every financial institution and telling them to debank a person. That's different than making up dirty dossiers where saying that there are golden you-know-whats happening with prostitution when it was totally fabricated and paid by the opposition. That's different than saying that there were secret servers in the basement of a building communicating with the Kremlin when we don't know a damn person in the Kremlin. We don't know anybody in Russia. We had nothing to do with Russia. That's different than having people take him off the ballot in states so that democracy could not prevail in those states. Having radical justices strip him off, that's different. That's different than raiding somebody's home, raiding their wife's closet, taking their legal documents protected by attorney-client privilege, taking their medical records protected over here by something called HIPAA. That's different than all of those things. That's different than calling every attorney general and district attorney in the country to indict somebody for doing absolutely nothing wrong. All of those indictments we've since overturned, right? That's criminal type behavior. That's not democracy. That's not the debate of ideas where people can have different perspective, right?
I believe, am I correct? You personally have been subpoenaed 112 times.
The most in American history, having done nothing wrong only because I was the proxy to my father. As the guy who ran the Trump organization and all of our properties, our global empire. Guess what? My father had constitutional protections when he was in the executive branch, right? There's protections afforded to the U.S. presidents. I had no protections afforded to me. And guess who they came after relentlessly? Now, they didn't go after Hunter Biden, who had pictures of prostitution, who had pictures of massive illicit drug use, who had shady deals all over the world, right? The laptop from hell, who's doing finger paintings and selling them to, all sorts of people around the world for massive amounts. He miraculously becomes Picasso the second his father becomes president. Give me a break. They weren't giving that guy a hard time, right? But yet a guy who tucks his kids in in bed at 8:45 every night, says a little prayer to them every night, has never gotten so much as a speeding ticket. They tried to destroy my life. They tried to destroy my father. They tried to bankrupt us. They tried to take our voice. They tried to gag order us. They wanted us gone. They wanted us irrelevant, and they certainly wanted my father dead.
How much did your faith sustain you during this period? I note from the book that I believe your children were both baptized in the White House.
Yeah, from what we've been told, it was the first time ever. Right. Two children were baptized, and those are special moments for us. Faith played a big role in this, a huge role in this. There's no question that God was looking down. There's no way we would have beaten Hillary Clinton if it wasn't. I mean, we were at a 5-1 financial deficit. We self-funded our entire campaign. And Tim, we didn't know a damn thing about politics. We're really good at building buildings. We didn't know the political system. We didn't know anybody in politics. We didn't have anybody endorsing us. It was literally my father, Don, and I, and then my wife, Laura, a little bit later on, who was out there every single day on the campaign trail fighting. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. I didn't know anything about illegal immigration. Like, I built golf courses as skyscrapers. And again, we were going up against the greatest political dynasty, probably in the last century in America, which was, the Clintons. You better believe the hand of God was on his shoulder. And you better believe that day in Butler, Pennsylvania, when my father turned at the last second, the hand of God was on his shoulder. And you better believe when that American flag that was right above my father's head at the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, right after he got shot, folded up in the perfect form of an angel. I can't tell you how many instances we felt a higher power guiding us. I can't tell you how many incredibly dark moments we had where all of a sudden there was light. It's not statistics. It defies statistics. And I'm a math guy. I truly believe that somebody was watching over my father in a real way and guiding him in a real way. It was the ultimate David and Goliath story. The mainstream media, 98% negative coverage toward our family and my father. Right. And we were able to beat that. We were able to beat the DOJ who was spying on our campaign. We were able to beat all the sieges that I talk about in this, all the weaponization, all the prosecutions. We were able to beat all of it. That defies any logical explanation. It defies statistics. And I can tell you, we felt it. We felt it.
I've sensed in what your father has been saying a shift in his relationship with God too. He just seems to talk about him more and reflect upon him more. Is that true? Do you think that the president his faith has grown since the assassination attempt, that he's gotten closer to God?
Yeah, there's no question. But also my father's never been one of these kind of fake politicians who just tries to wear God on his sleeve.
No.
For the purpose of a couple other extra votes. And by the way, in this country and in yours, there are plenty of people who try and do that. I mean, he's always had his relationship with God, and sometimes God puts the most unusual people into certain tasks. And I truly believe he did that with my father, right? My father was designed for this moment. You asked the question before, which is why. Like, you live such a great life. You have, Trump Force One, you have Mar-a-Lago, you have all the greatest golf courses in the world. Again, many over on your side of the pond. Why? Like, you knew how much this was going to cost you. You didn't know how brutal it was going to be in terms of the prosecution, but you knew what it was going to cost. And I think maybe that was God that led him there. And even if you line up, and I tried to do a really great job in the book of doing this, real estate put him on the map. Apprentice brought him into everybody's living room. I mean, but yet it's such a kind of just a strange series of lifetime events. Who goes from being a real estate developer to the number one, reality TV host who becomes beloved by all of America? I would make the argument that without The Apprentice, he arguably might not have won, nor had the gravitas or bravado or understanding of TV, he really fell into people's hearts in a very big way, not just in this country, but around the world. And it was a very unlikely series of events that got him from where he started to where he is today, both in terms of obviously 2016 and then having to redo it again for 2024. And what's interesting, Tim, is, if you look at 2020 and what happened there, the break, I can't tell you how devastating that was to us at the time. Like, we won that election. No one in this country, no one in this country believes that Joe Biden got 16 million more votes than Barack Obama. I don't think Barack Obama thinks that. In fact, like, I wish a reporter was honest enough to ask him. God works in mysterious ways, and I truly believe that the 4-year break was the best thing that ever happened, because not only did my father win the popular vote again, he won every swing state. Every state in the country went to the right. We won places. We won 11 counties in California that had never been won by a conservative before. We won Miami-Dade by 11%, a county that's Miami, obviously, in the U.S., but a county that's never, ever been won by a conservative. It's been 37 years it's been won by a conservative. And now all of a sudden, he's got the Senate, he's got the House, he's got the most incredible cabinet of killers. The mainstream media in our country is absolutely dead. The NBCs, the CNNs, the ABCs, they're irrelevant in this country. And he's got all the wind at his back, and he's doing transformational things, including Middle East peace, which you saw last week, and so many other great things for our nation, but also the Western world.
That leads me to this, another quote from your book. You say, Trump 2.0 isn't just working harder than ever, he's driving the mission with renewed purpose and unmistakable energy. But this time, he's doing it on his own terms, and he's having more fun than ever doing it. What is the difference between Trump 2.0 and Trump 1.0?
Listen, Trump 1.0 is one of the most successful presidencies in the history of our country. And this is that presidency on steroids. I mean,
right.
My father is throwing so much lead in the air that the Democrats don't even know what to do. Listen, he stopped 7 wars at this point, like including India, Pakistan. I mean, that would have been a big one. You had the Pakistani prime minister the other day come out and say that could have devolved into nuclear war. You saw him say that on the stage, and from Egypt. Look what he just did in the Middle East, right? But we've got the greatest economy. What we're doing in AI, what we're doing in crypto, what we're doing for the financial revolution in this country, what we're doing for energy exploration. We've got the lowest energy costs of any country in the world by far now. He believes in drill, baby, drill. You have trillions of dollars coming back to the United States. You have trillions of dollars reinvesting in the United States. Our markets are absolutely roaring right now. Yeah, I mean, every technology, every advance, America's winning the way in terms of AI. We've rebuilt the military. I mean, the American dream is back. A respect for America is back. We have peace in peace throughout the world, but peace in the Middle East. He's working like hell to end the Russian conflict.
And why do you think he was able to make more room in that? Why was he able to move forward greater than Joe Biden was?
Well, because Joe Biden was an imbecile who couldn't get through a sentence and certainly couldn't conduct an interview like this. I mean, I mean, listen, I've just got to be honest. Like Joe Biden he had lost his mind, and that's very sad. That will probably happen to you, and that's going to happen to me at some point. But he wasn't cognitively there. He couldn't walk across a stage without tripping. He couldn't get throughout a sentence without stumbling or misrepresenting some fact. He didn't have the stamina. He didn't have the personality. He didn't have the respect. And frankly, his policies were insane. They weren't just insane in the United States. They were insane around the world. And so he was wrong on every policy. And that's why, by the way, the defeat of his running mate, Kamala, was the greatest political victory in the history of the country. I mean, there was not one metric that she beat us in, not a single metric anywhere. And so in America, and I guess, you probably have a little bit of less of an appreciation over there, as certainly we have less of appreciation over here but I mean, it was one of the great political victories. And there was a referendum against the Democratic Party. Listen, people aren't into guys my size, 6'5", swimming in women's sports, right? And yet every day, that's one of the things that, the Democratic Party was espousing. It's I can't tell you how many good jobs, how many good people who had worked their entire careers in a job only to have DEI come in, and all of a sudden somebody who knew this subject, was the best at it, was the best worker, all of a sudden got passed up for somebody who checked some DEI box. This pissed off America. America was not okay with this, let alone inflation, and it roaring, let alone our energy costs going through the roof, let alone the illegal immigrants, immigration in this country. I mean, I personally have 4 friends that have lost children to fentanyl. 4 of my friends have lost little kids to fentanyl. Some weren't little, but it will always be little to their parents. People who were in this country were sick and tired of the nonsense, and they wanted it to end, and it's ended. I mean, every single day, one of those drug boats goes up in a ball of smoke. Americans are cheering right now because that just means that one of their sons or one of their daughters won't die based on some cartel, somewhere in South America. And that's why America had the referendum we did.
As you know, in this country, we have a problem with illegal immigration. You've also raised the issue of free speech. And the ambassador to the United Kingdom, Warren Stevens, recently said that in his meeting with Keir Starmer, they discussed how the UK could attract more foreign direct investment from the US. And he said his answer was lower your energy costs.
Yeah.
Are there things we can learn from the Trump revolution here in the UK?
Listen, Tim, I feel deeply personal when I speak. Listen, I'm not from the UK. I'm not a United Kingdom citizen. But there is no American who spent more time in your country than I have, and there's no American family who's probably invested more in the UK than the Trump family has. I've cut my teeth under multiple jobs in that country. I know everyone in that country. I know your PM. I know Warren very well. And I feel like, and also with my mom growing up in London, I feel like the UK is in my soul, it's in my DNA, and I care about the people over there deeply. So many of them are good friends. So let me put that on the table. the UK is losing the race in so many ways, and that hurts me to say as a person who cares about the place. There is an absolute reversion to the word no for everything that anybody wants to do. You want to go build a green at a golf course, and it's no. And then you have to fight for 5 years in order to get to a yes, and you spend millions of dollars. And at that time, you've already zapped all your energy. Every obstacle that I faced in that country, it started with a no, and you would have to fight like hell using every ounce of your energy, your money, and your tenacity to ultimately get to a practical place. And then you made something better. When I look at energy costs, and I look at every budget of every property we have, I've seen years where your energy costs in the UK have gone up by 5x. And yet I look at the great, North Sea, and you've got more natural gas, you've got more energy than just about anybody in the world, and it's not being utilized, and it's crippling your society. It's going to cripple the UK when it comes to AI, because obviously it takes a lot of energy. It's going to cripple the UK when it comes to cryptocurrency and modern day finance. Obviously, a lot of energy. It cripples your society when it comes to manufacturing and productivity, because obviously that is such a huge cost, right? And then you look at what's happening in the UAE. You look at what's happening in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. You look at what's happening in all across Asia. And you look at what's happening in America, where we're going full out on energy right now. I mean, drill, baby, drill. I pray, as somebody who is deeply aligned and loves the UK, I pray that they can start exploiting energy again, that you can bring down your energy costs, which are just killing your nation. I pray that you can get to a spot where you can have freedom of speech, because that goes really badly, really, really quick. I mean, obviously that's ingrained in us as Americans. That's the First Amendment. But when I see some of these cases where somebody comes out and they have a traumatic experience and they say X, Y, and Z, and then all of a sudden a judge locks them up for doing so, man, that's a dangerous route that you're going down. And I would just be very, very careful. And in terms of illegal immigrants and illegal immigration, oftentimes people don't want to have the conversation. They don't want to say what I'm about to say, but I grew up in London, and London is no longer what London used to be. Frankly, New York is probably no longer what New York used to be, albeit a lot of the cities in this country are getting cleaned up very quickly under my father. And you got to be very, very, very careful. You got to be very
How
careful.
has London changed?
Well, listen, I mean, I think the running notion right now, and I hear this all over, right? And I'm usually the benefactor of feedback, but I hear from people all the time, you can't walk across London wearing a nice watch anymore, that they wouldn't do it, And that's very sad in a city that really epitomizes the Western world. And that was not the case of when I was growing up in London, but, people are scared. People are scared to wear a watch.
Are people blaming that on our mayor, Sadiq Khan? Does his name, because I know your father has been critical of him as well.
Yeah, listen, I don't want to get into somebody's politics in that way. I don't want to start pointing at political figures over there. I don't think that's my job, as I don't think it's your job, over in the UK to point at, at mayors and right. These are personal elections and decisions and everything else that get made. But I would be very, very careful with the lack of law and order that's plaguing our cities. And we need to be careful of it in the United States as well in certain places. My father's done a hell of a job cleaning it up. But I can tell you, if you go over to Dubai, people who have second homes in London, they will tell you, I'm spending a lot less time there because I'm afraid to walk down the street. I'm afraid to go get a cup of coffee in the city. I'm afraid I won't wear a watch out in the city. London's got to be very, very careful, and the UK has to be very, very careful. And again, I say this coming from a place of total hope and total admiration and total respect, because there's no better ally to the United States than the United Kingdom. I adore the country. I adore the people there. We are the same people. We've been shoulder to shoulder in every major conflict from for a long, long time, and we've always fought together and we'll always be together. But what's happening in London is scary to a lot of people in the Western world and to a lot of people around the world. And I certainly hope that the lessons are learned. When you look at my father and how quickly he cleaned up Washington, D.C., he cleaned it up in 12 days. They arrested 4,300 people, and Washington, D.C. no longer has any crime. Murder's gone, everything gone, carjacking's gone. I would love to see London take a little bit of that playbook. And by the way, there's other cities in obviously the UK that should take a little bit of that playbook as well. And I think we would have better societies if that were to happen. And I think it would really be appreciated by 99% of the people who just want safe and clean streets, not just there, but around the world.
you speak as a businessman. We should explain that while your father is in the White House, you are separating out the interests of the Trump organization and the presidency. I will address this because it came up on CNN recently. How do you respond to critics who say that the Trump family is effectively leveraging having a president? Because by having a president, if, for instance, you invest in Bitcoin, as I know you have done, and he says Bitcoin is a good thing to invest in, that might be something that brings profit to the Trump family.
Yeah, Tim, I mean, it's pretty crazy. I mean, first of all, let's go back to profiting off the presidency. Let's start there, and then we can talk about Bitcoin. We spent $400 million keeping the animals off of our back. My father self-funded his entire campaign. My father's never received a paycheck from the federal government. He donates his paycheck every month to some worthwhile charity in the U.S., largely dedicated to kind of governmental causes, whether it be, injured soldiers and, a whole host of other, kind of worthwhile causes. Give me a break. Give me a break. And then, every year we donate, I write a big check back to the United States Treasury for any business that comes from overseas governments through one of our hotels. So if somebody books on Expedia.com or Travelocity or one of these, OTR, websites, and that person is affiliated with the government, or comes through any other channel, I literally take the entire, kind of profit of that stay and I donate it back to the United States, right? And I write that check every year. That never gets reported. It never gets brought up. But the amount that the presidency has cost my father, you go from a Barack Obama, who's a community organizer, to having the largest house on Martha's Vineyard, versus my father. My father's lost a lot of zeros off the back of his name based on the fact that he was president. And guess what? He doesn't care, nor do I care. As to Bitcoin, we got into cryptocurrency for really two reasons. First of all, we got canceled by every major financial institution in the country for not doing anything wrong, only because my father wore a hat, and why wore a hat that said "Make America Great Again." And the banks were told by government regulators to cancel us, right? They were certainly being told, and so I got into crypto because I didn't have a damn choice. Like, it was like the only rails that we had left as a major organization, and I realized that it is the future of finance. But if my father goes out and says that Boeing's an amazing company, and you own the index funds that Boeing happens to be included in, is that you profiting off of the presidency? Like, no. Cryptocurrency is the future of finance. I have nothing to do with Washington, D.C. I believe in Bitcoin with every ounce of my heart and soul. I have a company called American Bitcoin. We just got listed on the NASDAQ a couple weeks ago. But to suggest that it's ever enriched, that the presidency has enriched my father after the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars we've had to spend in defense of absolute nonsense shams, not to mention the amount of deals that we've turned down around the world. Hey, I would have had a hotel in every city in China had we not been in politics, right? I would have had a hotel. I would have had 5 hotels in Taiwan. I would have had a hotel in every country, every suspect country, because politics would have never been a factor. No different than Ritz-Carlton does, no different than Four Seasons does. And guess what? I don't even play in those markets because I can't, because of politics. You know how much that costs us? That costs us a tremendous amount. And you know what? We don't give a damn. We're saving the United States of America. We're saving our Constitution. We're saving our flag. We're saving the Western world. And when I see peace in the Middle East, man, I would do it 1,000 times over. I don't care what it costs us. I would do it 1,000 times because it's all worth it. It's all worth it.
2 final short questions. 1, will you run for the presidency?
Listen. Never say never to anything in life, right? But I can tell you, I've been on both the best sides of politics and by far the worst sides, and I understand the game very well at this point. And I think we've developed great voices. I really do. I mean, hence this book right now is the #1 book in the country by far. Not even close. Not even close, right? No, the reason I say that is people adore us in this country and people love it, right? And the MAGA movement is the greatest movement that we've ever seen in the history of the United States politics, right? And I've been a big part of that movement. I think if I wanted to, I could. I just don't know if I'd want to.
That's a good, polished politician's answer.
No, I just don't know if I want to also put my kids through the crap and I mean. It cannot. It oftentimes it looks very glamorous outside, and it's not, as they're trying to take off your head and put you in prison for doing absolutely nothing wrong. So
I know it's not glamorous. I've covered the campaign trail. I was in 2016. I was in Trump Towers when your father won, and you describe the atmosphere perfectly in the book, where you say open bar and no food. everyone was drunk by the time your father came out to to accept his win.
By the way, you know why? We didn't want to plan these lavish parties where thousands of balloons fell from the ceiling and everybody's eating caviar. You know what we wanted to do? We wanted to win Michigan. Like, how about that for a concept? You know, Hillary spent more time, planning her under the glass ceiling, victory party. Had she spent a little bit more time campaigning, she might have actually won the race. Like, we were much more concerned about winning the race than the finger foods. We could worry about the finger foods afterward. We're great at hospitality.
Understood. Well, look, my final question, and I hope from this interview people have gained a better understanding of what motivates the Trump family. And my final question is this: what does Scotland mean to you and your family? Because people don't know that. A lot of people don't know this, that your father is Scottish, basically.
Yeah, so am I. My grandmother came from Stornoway, all the way up, and off of obviously the western coast of Scotland. A beautiful woman, a woman that meant so much to me, meant so much to my father, obviously, in so many ways. And when we found Turnberry, first we found Aberdeen. We wanted to build the greatest golf course anywhere in the world, and we succeeded. Aberdeen is the greatest golf course anywhere in the world, and I just built a second course at Trump Aberdeen, and it's. Many people say it's top 5 course anywhere on earth. It's spectacular. It's beyond good. It's the best of the best. And I put so much time into the eastern side of Scotland, which is obviously Aberdeenshire. And then obviously you saw what I did with Turnberry. I mean, I was going back and forth to Turnberry once a week for 3 years, and built every inch of that property, that hotel. I could tell you every single room by room number. I love it, and I saved that property. It was bought by Leisure Corp out of Dubai. They never visited the property. There's not a whole lot of love. The Japanese owned it before that. They didn't put a whole lot of love into it, and I came back and and my father and we saved Turnberry. And I have hundreds of employees in Scotland. I love the country. I love the people. I love the culture. I love the love of the United States and the mutual bond we have. Again, as I said before, I adore the UK. I adore Scotland, and so much of my professional heart and soul, and so much of my actual genetics is from there. And so, this isn't. We're not faking this, right? This isn't like we're one of those people who went to London for a weekend, and all of a sudden we want to claim allegiance to I mean, there's no American who's put more money into your great nation, and no American who's spent more time over there than I have. And I adore every facet of your society. I just, from an outsider's perspective, I do worry greatly about the freedom of speech, and I do worry greatly about energy costs, and I certainly worry about your immigration problem.
Eric Trump, thank you very much.
Tim, it was a great honor to be on.
If you're enjoying our journalism, why not sign up to From the Editor, our free email newsletter? Start your day with the latest news and opinion, plus our bite-sized puzzles. Scan the QR code to sign up free today.